Going to talk more about this now with the lead researcher of that report, journalist Julie Posetti, who joins me from Geneva. Julie, you are the director of the Nerves Information Integrity Initiative. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. This report is called Tipping Point, the chilling escalation of violence against women in the public sphere. What is this tipping point exactly?
So the tipping point refers to this very steep trajectory in online violence episodes that lead to offline harm. And to put this in context, in 2020, I led a study for UNESCO called The Chilling. And it was called The Chilling because of the chilling effect that gender-based online violence was having on women journalists specifically. Fast forward to 2025, and UN Women commissioned this global survey focused not only on women journalists, but also women human rights defenders and women activists. We recognise that women journalists are effectively the proxies for women in public life more broadly, but we wanted to understand the experiences of these other professional groups of women, like human rights lawyers, for example, and those who are activists perhaps in the field of refugee rights alongside gender rights. But the tipping point refers to the dramatic escalation in this trajectory from online to offline harm. And we can now conclude that there has indeed been more than double the rate of women journalists, for example, experiencing offline attacks, abuse and harassment in 2025 compared to 2020 when we did that first survey for UNESCO. We don't have the comparative data for the human rights defenders and the activists because they're new groups in our survey. But what we can tell you is that for those other groups, the rate of online violence leading to offline harm was even higher. So 44% of women in those groups experienced offline abuse, harassment and attacks, and that included things such as stalking and physical assault. And so this is a very, significant concern when 44% of women in those contexts are experiencing this kind of offline harm. It should really sound the alarm bell.
It certainly. I guess one of the key questions is why? Why is digital violence having more and more consequences in the real world? Do we have any ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, we posit that there are two primary factors here. One is the mainstreaming of generative AI tools, which allow for abusive content, harassing content, disinformational content, and we see a lot of crossover between digital misogyny and gendered disinformation, for example. It's much easier and cheaper and quicker to produce that content, and it's much easier to spread it virally than it was 5 years ago. And so everything from deep fakes to cheap fakes are on the rise. And the other factor is the rise in authoritarianism globally, where we see, attacks on women journalists and other public interest information communicators increasing as authoritarian leaders seek to curtail truth-telling and accountability reporting, for example.
So, Julie, given all of that, what can be done to stop this increase in violence, whether it's online or offline?
I mean, the answer to that is really depressing, I'm sorry to say, because 5 years ago when we ran this survey, which was published by UNESCO, it was accompanied ultimately in subsequent reports with almost 100 recommendations for action to try to address this crisis. And many of those were attempted. But the situation we now find ourselves in is the consolidation of power by big tech actors, most of which are anchored within North America, and the decline, unfortunately, of efforts within, say, trust and safety groups within those big tech platforms, and the abolition of them in some cases, and a kind of increased unaccountability, so the ability to act with impunity by those companies. So the situation is really quite dire in terms of trying to seek accountability, and it points to the need for improved and increased regulatory efforts of the kind we see in Europe through the Digital Services Act, for example. But it also points to the need to address the threats to women in public life. that come via networked misogyny as a form of extremism, as a threat to national security, because it's this kind of misogynistic attacks on women in public life is a byproduct of both rising authoritarianism and also the attempt to roll back gender rights, which is associated with the radicalization of young men towards, potentially violent extremism. So, there's a nexus here that needs to be probed. And I think perhaps if we can help policymakers understand that trajectory, then we have a hope of addressing this. At the same time, just ensuring that there are safe spaces for women who are targeted in these ways to commune and to activate protective efforts, and that there are efforts to also educate, law enforcement and the judiciary, and that there is investment in responsive networks and monitoring systems that help to prevent the escalation of online violence to offline harm. And another project I lead, which is funded by the UK government, aims to monitor in real time these kinds of attacks and includes kind of embedded indicators for online violence escalation. The objective is to try to provide enough insight in real time to be able to intervene in a timely manner to prevent the worst outcomes, which, frankly, are potentially deadly.
It certainly are. Julie, thank you for that. Julie Posetti, thanks so much for speaking to us live there from Geneva.